Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. My name is Alessio Patalano, and I'm a professor of war and strategy in East Asia at King's College, London. It gives me great pleasure today to engage with you all and offer some thoughts, some initial remarks to what looks like is going to be an absolutely incredibly interesting event. Over the next couple of days, you will be diving into some of the specific aspects that concern international shipping. And in particular, you will be looking at aspects of safety, security, from cyber to the management of ports, to ensuring that shipping continues to deliver on an everyday basis international prosperity and connectivity. And so within this context, what I'd like to do with you today, with my thoughts, is to sort of help you getting the broader context within which some of your conversation will take place. Because I think that it's very important to address the broader international order or the state of world affairs, as it were, if we really want to understand how shipping is changing and how perhaps shipping will have to change even further looking ahead. And so today, the topic of my conversation really is provide that broader context. But that broader context, in part, is defined by what it's known as the age of competition. We are back, if we look across national security strategies the world over, we are back to an understanding of a world that is inherently more fragile, certainly contested. State-on-state competition is back as a central feature of international affairs. But what does that mean with the international order, and how does that affect? How does that how is that linked to broader questions of shipping? What are people in the private business, in the business of international maritime connectivity, have to do to address and engage with these changes? So today what I want to do is to first and foremost cast a wider net to understand what the changes are. In my view, the central question therefore that needs to be addressed is first and foremost, how is the international order changing? And that question, I think, has an answer that is composed by the three main ways in which the international order is changing. First, I think it's very important to draw attention to how international order today is affected by a growing attempt not only to manipulate, but outright undermine the rule of law. We've seen this in Ukraine with the invasion of Russia, an illegal act of war designed to take control over the sovereign territory of a different neighboring country. There is also a second way in which the international order is changing, and that is the one that pertains to the risk of instability. Because as the rule of law is being undermined, there is also, as a result of that, a broader tendency to use coercion and different under the threshold of war ways of deploying force that in turn are increasing risks of instability. And of all places in the world, in the broader Indo-Pacific area, we still have some pretty significant risks of instability. And as we look forward, in a context in which the age of competition defines international relations, that is the second way in which the international order is changing, and one way that will affect how shipping continues to evolve. And the third thing really is directly related to this point. The third way in which the international order is changing is bringing about a general rethink of interdependence. Just over the past few days in Prague, there was a major high-level stakeholder meeting of the European Union, thinking about the relationship between Europe and the Indo-Pacific. And one consistent theme that came across among all officials participating and talking about international order was how events, international events, in the past few years are really casting a shadow over our current and certainly recent understanding of the world becoming globalized. Today, that is changing. There is less and less talk of globalization and more talk of interdependence. What is the difference? And how does that sort of affect the world of shipping? These are the three ways in which the international order is changing. And these are the 3 points that I'll try to explore now over the next few minutes. So let me take these in turn. First, let's talk about the rule of law and how it's been undermined. There is no question that events in Eastern Europe, and I understand that you have another keynote that will more specifically touch upon this. There is nonetheless a need to engage with this question of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because it is presenting a serious challenge to the sacrosanct rule of respecting sovereignty. This is becoming an incredibly sort of a cogent feature of international relations. And certainly what we've seen in Eastern Europe, something that would have been unthinkable even just a couple of years ago. And certainly the scale of the Russian invasion and the violation of national sovereignty really bring us back to a reality that has not been with us since pretty much the end of World War II. And today, what we're looking at, when we're looking at the situation in Ukraine, we continue to see developments that are particularly troubling. Because the main focus so far has been on the land campaign, but increasingly more, we started to understand or to witness how the maritime dimension of the war in Ukraine is not just a local affair that sees the involvement in the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea of Russian naval forces against the limited Ukrainian coastal defenses. Indeed, over the past few weeks, we have come to learn and to appreciate that the majority of crucial exports, raw materials for food security, from different types of grains to fertilizers, of which Ukraine is one of the world's leading exporters, they all held up in Ukraine. Pretty much we understand that about the same amount of grain that Ukraine exports every year is being at the moment stuck in Ukrainian silos and cannot get out because of the lack of possibility of a safe use of ports and shipping lanes that from Ukrainian ports through the Black Sea and the Bosphorus would take these raw materials to their final destinations. And this is creating a very peculiar situation, one in which the repercussions will be quite significant and certainly will not stay just in the European context. Some of the major importers of Ukrainian grains are in Africa, the Middle East, parts of Asia. So in this sense, this is a significant issue for shipping. Shipping is at the moment part of a strategic game. And that should be a very important reminder of how prosperity and connectivity that are delivered through shipping actually can be particularly politicized, can be weaponized for the purpose of a particular strategic objective. And that is certainly what Russia is trying to do at the moment. But it would be, in a way, remiss of me not to place that into a broader context, because what is happening in Ukraine is not the only way in which sovereignty and rule of law are tested. This is certainly true in the broader Indo-Pacific, whereby a number of maritime and territorial disputes continue to exist. That is interesting because it takes us the question of undermining rule of law and the respect of national sovereignty and how we carry out our differences over this matter into the realm of maritime affairs. If you think about the South China Sea, if you think about the East China Sea, the contestation over maritime boundary delimitation, as well as ownership of particular reefs, rocks, and island features in these two maritime basins, speaks directly to this question of respect of rule of law and, in a broader sense, to this question of how important it is to carry out our differences without the use of force. That is certainly true, as I said, not just in the South China Sea, but also in the East China Sea. So that problem that we've seen unfolding in the Eastern Europe, in Ukraine at the moment, through outright war, does not mean that the problem of the respect of the rule of law and the risk that has, particularly in undermining basic principles of the sovereignty, of territorial sovereignty and integrity of states, is just not going to go away, and certainly not going to be just limited to this to the continental land-based spaces. It is also a maritime problem, and certainly the maritime dimension of this story has even greater significance in the Indo-Pacific context. And we know this because already over the past few years, countries like Japan, through the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy that was first announced in 2016, one of the first pillars of this idea was the promotion, establishment, and sustaining of rule of law. That is essential to ensure connectivity, the pursuit of economic prosperity, which in the broader Indo-Pacific and indeed internationally rests on shipping. Shipping is at the very heart of all of this. We cannot forget that. And without support to the rule of law, there is very little chance for prosperity to be ensured. It's certainly a commitment to peace and stability, not just to preventing that any attempt at undermining the rule of law affects the context, but also to meet the challenges of non-traditional security issues, as they used to be known until very recently, and today captured very well from man-made and natural disasters or major instances of accidents, many of which related to the problem of climate change, sea level rises, and how it affects populations living along coastline. So just one example, thinking about the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy that was set forth by Japan a few years back, there is a clear sense of link between prosperity delivered through connectivity, which involves shipping at heart, and how that relates to problems unfolding from undermining the rule of law on one hand, and on the other, the inability to be fully committed to peaceful, safe, stable ways to engage with them, so also to be able to address other type of challenges of a less traditional fashion. In all, though, this first point of mine really is about understanding how the oceans are also becoming a clear sort of front line of geopolitical confrontation. And we need to keep this very firmly at the back of our mind as we discuss the transformation and changes in the world of shipping. But let me move now on my second broader point, the risks of instability, because if the ocean is a front line of geopolitical competition, certainly that invites a broader reflection over the risks of instability and how this changed international picture affects and informs this second type of a way in which international order is changing. Let me first clarify a couple of assumptions. I think that over the past few months, and certainly the last couple of years, it's been pretty clear that we have witnessed internationally a much more active People's Republic of China. That has meant that both in the maritime domain, in diplomatic terms, in economic terms, it is pretty much clear that during the last couple of years, and certainly that has not changed since the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, we have seen that China is much more active, and that robust military sort of activity has implication and has certainly contributed to heighten some of the risks of instability that exists in the Indo-Pacific specifically, but more broadly the world over. And this will only be reinforced by Russia that is most definitely going to come out weakened by the events in Ukraine, regardless of how the war ends or settles. A weaker Russia will be closer to China in order to bounce back geopolitically as a relevant actor. opening up a more significant conversation, particularly in terms of maritime connectivity, of the extent to which the geopolitical landscapes of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific are coming closer together in ways that it was not the case. And certainly in years to come, that will have an impact in particular of our understanding and approach to stability, security, and connectivity in the high north of the Arctic, as well as in the Indian Ocean. Before we go to that part, let me also spend a few words about that diplomatic and economic activity and sort of a broader behavior. We've seen over the past few months how Chinese officials have been sort of more frequently visiting and taking a greater role in key strategic choke points. This is important from a shipping perspective because it links maritime communication to the strategic dimension of competition. And if you are looking at this map, you certainly have a clear sense of the problem there. And we have learned over the past few months how some of the key main military artificial installations in the South China Sea have been reinforced, strengthened, and sort of brought to a much more significant military utility. All of this really tells us something about how maritime connectivity cannot be entirely disentangled from the broader questions of strategic and military balance. And that is increasing a sense of risk. This risk that is materialized today around the key focal points, certainly the South China Sea is one, but the Straits of Taiwan, the relationship between Taipei and Beijing are another important focal point. But within this broader context, of course, we cannot forget about the Korean Peninsula and how North Korea also over the past few months is getting closer to China and also becoming more active in terms of renewing attention, global attention to its missile and nuclear programs as a way to regain the interest of the international community. Now, does this mean that these series of risks are bringing the world to a different place, or bringing the world to a less sort of a more unstable place? To an extent, yes. But the level of interdependence that exists today, the way we are connected today, the way in which shipping links us together, that is unlikely to change. And that is true also for the layout of the underwater sea cable. So I remain pretty confident that the very inherent nature of the global economy that is so much on physical and digital connectivity that is delivered through the maritime space, through shipping first and foremost, will not fundamentally change what we think. But we have to be absolutely clear that there is no more or simple way to divorce the maritime shipping dimension from the broader geopolitical elements that inform the dynamics of the international order. Certainly, that change that I mentioned in terms of the attempts at undermining the rule of law, combined with stronger risks of instability, are two significant factors. That lead to my third point, which is how we're rethinking about interdependence. We have now a number of examples over the past few years that really tell us something about where globalization, as it used to be known, is changing. It's being perceived, it's been thought about to be different. And disruptions these days can come from different factors. It could be human or machine error. Think about the Evergreen incident in the Suez Canal and the disruption that it has brought about. Think about disruptions like the throwback attack at Myers, that again created a massive problem. Or indeed the impact that man-made natural disasters. And I'm thinking here about the impact that COVID has had and continues to have. Think, for example, the lockdowns in Shanghai and the slowdown of the ability to get things in and out of China. Or indeed the triple disaster in Japan, the combined sort of effects of the nuclear meltdown, the freak wave and the earthquake that provided a significant disruption to international supply chains. Things are changing. And in this respect, interdependence is bringing the problem of the stability and resilience of supply chains at the heart of national debates. These questions are becoming much more securitized than they ever were before. So what are my conclusions in all of this? I think there are sort of three main thoughts that I want to share with you, and I want to leave you with. First, certainly we're looking at a very different international system. We're looking at a system that is perhaps more fractured, but one in which this securitization at the national level of the importance of maintaining, on one hand, connectivity, global international connectivity to ensure prosperity certainly is true, but this is filtered through very different lenses. Lenses that perhaps emphasize interdependence that need to be based on a commonality of values, shared values, commonality of ideas, principles, a sense of trust of the partner with whom you are having a relationship. That will affect how shipping will sort of deliver prosperity, particularly on critical raw materials. That is likely to become a subject of intense conversation. Who do you trust to do a certain type of trade with? How does that affect how the particular sort of goods that are traded will be affected? Certainly, this also speaks to a second dimension. State actors will try to pursue a more diversified source of primary materials and links in terms of trade, because they want to be less vulnerable, right? There's going to be diversification as part of an objective to become more resilient and therefore less exposed to disruptions to supply chains, either because of disasters or because someone else is intervening, as it's been the case, for example, in the Black Sea. Above all, this means that the logic that has underpinned shipping for the better part of the last 25 years, this just in time, just enough principle, is unlikely to remain a core principle. Resilience, reduction in vulnerability, greater diversification, that will demand the business to change. The business will have to be more strategic. Strategic not in terms of being driven by business rationale alone, but also by considerations that speak to national security. So in this respect, the system perhaps is going to be more interdependent, but perhaps less globalized, as we know. This isn't, for me, this is enough from me. This is what I think is that we need to be careful on the back of our mind in terms of how international order is changing and how those changes are likely to affect and what kind of direction of travel the conversation around shipping and its logistics needs to go in order for this conversation to remain fully ingrained and fully connected to the broader transformation of international affairs. I hope you can enjoy the next couple of days, and I'm sure that the deliberations will bring a significant difference and will improve our understanding of where shipping should go and is likely to go in the foreseeable future. For now, I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the very best for the deliberations of the next couple of days. Thank you.